Snow White and the Frozen Dwarfs. On August 24, 2006, an International Astronomical Union adopted fixed definitions for various objects in the solar system. Snow White, otherwise known as 2007 OR10, is a dwarf planet about 13 billion kilometers from the Sun. Its orbit, canted by almost 31 degrees to the plane of the ecliptic, is so large that it was closest to the Sun in 1856 and will not reach its furthest point until 2130, taking more than 550 years to revolve. Snow White joins many other icy worlds so far from the Sun that it would be hard to pick out that luminary from the star field. It is in similar orbit with its sister dwarf, Eris 2003 UB313, within a region occupied by so-called trans-Neptunian objects, TNO, or Kuiper belt objects, KBO. Astronomers Kenneth Edgeworth and Gerald Kuiper proposed a Kuiper belt theory in 1951. In 1992, the as-yet unnamed 1992 QB1 was discovered, confirming the idea that a group of frigid objects beyond Neptune was in orbit around the Sun. Dwarf planets are also part of the TNO designation, trans-Neptunian, although they are in a subclass by themselves. In 2006, a controversial vote was cast at a meeting of astronomers in Prague that provided a way to classify various celestial bodies. 4 relevant resolutions were proposed. Resolution 5A, definition of a planet. Resolution 5B, definition of a classical planet. Resolution 6A, definition of a Pluto-class objects. 6B, definition of Plutonian objects. According to the vote, the planet, in quotation, is a celestial body that orbits the Sun, has nearly round shape, and has cleared its orbit of extraneous debris. Another classification was added to the terms used by astronomers: dwarf planet. A dwarf planet is essentially something that looks like a planet but is not a planet. Pluto is now considered a dwarf planet, as is the asteroid Ceres, along with an aforementioned Eris and Snow White, Haumea, Makemake, Sedna, Quoar, and Orcus are also likely to be dwarf planets. Pluto's moon, Charon, would also fit if it were not a moon. There are dozens more that await further investigation. Pluto is an intriguing planet, isn't it? It's odd. Immanuel Kant's theory that the solar system was born from a dusty cloud of gas, or nebula, floating in space, is known as the nebular hypothesis. As Kant suggested, the cloud contracted because gravity drew the cloud's particles together into clumps. As they grew, the clumps became more attractive, finally accumulating into a mass. The gravitational force became so strong that it compressed the mass into a hot ball, rotating with the cloud's original angular momentum. It gathered more and more matter until nuclear fusion reaction ignited it, giving birth to the Sun, a structure called an accretion disk, circling its equatorial plane. The accretion disk is said to have extended beyond the orbit of Neptune. According to scientists, eddies of matter formed in the spinning ring of dust and gas. Those eddies grew larger, slowly sucking in more and more particles until hundreds of millions of impacts from nebular condensates gradually formed the planets. The Kuiper belt, as well as the theoretical Oort cloud, were supposed to be holding areas for the remaining material that did not condense into planets or dwarf planets. In a previous picture of the day, another class of solar system object called Centaurs were discussed. It was noted that they are what could be called cometary asteroids and come in several colors: reddish-brown, blue, green, and brownish-yellow. As suggested by this writer, the Centaur objects could be colored because they were ejected by the gas giant planets, the colors corresponding to the colors of their parents. An interesting characteristic of the various dwarf planets is that they, too, are colorful. Snow White, contrary to its name, is reddish in color, like its sister Haumea. Pluto itself is brownish-yellow, while Eris is green. In a plasma cosmogony hypothesis, the stars are formed when cosmic Birkeland currents twist around one another, creating Z-pinch regions that compress the plasma into a solid. Laboratory experiments have shown that such compression zones are the most likely candidates for star formation and not collapsing nebulae. When stars are born, they are probably under extreme electrical stress. In that case, they will split into two or more daughter stars, thereby equalizing their electrical potential. The fission process is repeated in further electrical disturbances by flaring red dwarfs and gas giant planets ejecting rocky and icy planets, moons, comets, asteroids, and meteorites. Planetary systems may also be acquired over time by electrical capture of independent interstellar bodies such as dim brown dwarf stars. That seems the best explanation for our fruit salad of a solar system. Wall Thornhill. When New Horizons arrives at Pluto in July 2015, electric universe theorists expect a nebular hypothesis to be falsified again, as it has in the past. 99% of the universe is plasma, so the conclusions derived from the hypothesis are not connected with real observations. Stephen Smith. I have read that before. Long farewell to the Big Bang model of cosmology. Summary. The article deals with the background to the failure of physics in the 20th century, and why it is so important to work out a new physical worldview. The cosmos is to be understood as an open system, not as an inflating ball. This knowledge has a direct bearing on the understanding of the sun and thus also on its reproduction in the laboratory. It can possibly provide us with a clean energy source for the future with which we can achieve the energy transition from fossil carbon age to the hydrogen age. Cosmology is the study of the world, of the origin, development, and structure of the cosmos. If we allow the cosmos to develop We cannot know anything about the origin. The current structure, however, can be seen, but inferring the initial state from the current structure only works with time-independent processes, such as a Markov process. Since a time can be reversed there, this is not possible with a development process. Every engineer knows that you cannot deduce from the final state to the beginning. Just as little as you can still recognize the horse-drawn carriage in a modern automobile. The assumption of an initial state belongs to the realm of belief in a religion. Besides, what time is valid in the cosmos? Time is relative, so you have no absolute start. Religions are static, but our knowledge grows dynamically with our failure and our successes in mastering nature. In short, the development of technology, the technical replication of elements of nature, is the ultimate proof of our understanding of how they work. How can we then succeed in reconciling belief in religion with science? Our faith ends where knowledge begins. Fewer and fewer functions of nature are expected of gods today, and more functions are recognized, and thus become the responsibility of mankind. 100 years ago, Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian priest, Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian priest, was inspired by the belief that this reconciliation might succeed because at the beginning of the 20th century, there were two currents in the Catholic Church. One wanted a liberalization of religion, the other wanted to reconstruct old power structures, as it is expressed in the encyclical of Pope Pius X. Of course, the authority to interpret the sky was one of the most important goals. It was not about the unreserved exploration of the cosmos. Rather, it was about the integration of scientific discoveries into the thought structure of Christian doctrine of creation, whereby the scientists consciously found support and recognition that best corresponded to this idea. They were added in 1936 by Pope Pius XI through a newly founded Pontifical Academy of Sciences. On the other hand, at the beginning of the 20th century, electromagnetism was so well researched that it could be transferred to technical applications. However, the application was still based on a large-scale charge separation by means of mechanical power, largely by burning fossil fuels. At the same time, two worldviews competed: the electromagnetic of James Clerk Maxwell and the mechanical gravitational worldview of Isaac Newton. While the electromagnetic worldview of the 19th century brought us from the energy industry to microelectronics and into an unprecedented level of prosperity, the advances on the basis of Newton's gravity seem rather modest. The question of why the moon and the space probes are not on the Earth falling back but swinging into orbit cannot be explained mechanically satisfactorily. Even though the worldview that was developed at the Solvay conferences from 1911 is still adhered to today. Many discoveries have been made since the beginning of space travel history that do not fit this picture. We have to ask why this is so. Figure 1. Einstein and the Pontifical Academy. You have to know that philosophy at the turn of the 20th century was shaped by subjective idealism. The mysticism of the virgin birth was promoted by Lemaitre and replaced by a mathematical mysticism. Paul Dirac was one of the most prominent exponents of this mystification. who, although an avid atheist, was a member of the newly founded Pontifical Academy of Sciences from the beginning until his death. Mathematics took the place of religious belief. Remember in the ancient times? The only place that scientists were allowed to let their minds soar was in mathematics, that the church did not feel threatened. Mathematics took the place of religious belief, and with its symmetry as an expression of beauty, it is more important to have beauty in your equations than agreement with the experiment, Paul Dirac once formulated his credo in Scientific American. The Rock even spoke in the context of God, whom he considered being a highly brilliant mathematician. Wolfgang Pauli once put it, "Our friend Dirac has a religion, and its motto is 'There is no God,' and Dirac is his prophet." He became the creator of a number of physical phantoms, the existence of which in some cases has even been allegedly proven, such as the spin from the Dirac equation and the neutrino in the radioactive decay of the neutron. So, it came about that relativity theory and quantum mechanics emerged as intellectual fantasy products and were recognized as established theories. In a conversation with Einstein, Heisenberg admitted that one does not yet know how the mathematical formulation of quantum mechanics relates to the basis of which is the Lorentz transformation of Maxwell's equations, whose sole purpose for Einstein was to symmetrize these equations. This symmetrization is a physically completely nonsensical operation, since it destroys the character of the equations, namely to describe the propagation of electromagnetic waves. As a second stroke of genius, Albert Einstein invented the curvature of space through gravity because he could not explain how celestial bodies were kept in their orbit. Einstein himself must have taken it as a joke because he confessed to his friend Paul Ehrenfest, "I've already done something wrong in the theory of gravity, which puts me at risk of being interned in a madhouse." Although anyone who knows something about physics and geometry knows that curvatures can only be observed on surfaces, and that light rays are influenced in their direction by diffraction due to optical effects. Whole generations of physicists seem to have no longer learned the difference between a surface and a space. Physically, a surface presents itself as a phase boundary between two different states of matter. Furthermore, they seem to have forgotten that time is never independent of the path. This is why there cannot be a four-dimensional world, but there can be a process in which there are sequences of states. Only surfaces can be curved. Space-time is space and time, not a four-dimensional space. Time, in contrast, is a number of motion cycles that are counted and are synchronized with the movement of the Earth around its axis. Unlike the path on which it is based, it has no direction. Where one begins to count the cycles is left to the discretion of the observer. Consequently, the time is relative. Einstein once remarked that time is what clocks indicate, with which he expressed the relativity of time. Relativity means that a relation, i.e., a relationship, is established between the observer and the observed phenomenon, no more and no less. Therefore, appearances can be perceived differently from different points of view, although they themselves are unchanged. So if you perceive an object in the distance as smaller, it is not due to physics, but to the optics of your perception. The Lorentz transformation does the same with Maxwell's equations which is why this figure shows time and distance distortions. As Einstein said, you can fool of yourself with mathematics. Physics have learned to solve equations, but apparently they have not been taught what they mean. Since Dirac and Heisenberg, visual perception wasn't trained when I was studying physics half a century ago. So physicists tried using mathematics to construct an illusory world for which they were looking for evidence in reality. However, new phantoms have to be invented, because this leads to contradictions again and again. Then further evidence was sought in reality without being bothered by the fact that this evidence had already been used up for other phenomena. We have recently started calling something like this alternative facts. Mathematics is a language intended to describe real things and appearances. Alternative facts can also be invented with a language. One of the most spectacular examples of this alternative facts is the black hole, which repeatedly stimulates people's fantasies. Einstein's equation of general relativity has a pole, which is interpreted as a point of maximum gravity, and should be strong, that it would not even let light escape. The belief was triggered because they could not explain why galaxies do not obey Newton's equation of gravitation, but must contain much larger forces in order to explain their rotational speeds at the edges. To resolve this contradiction, the black hole, dark matter, and dark energy were invented. But these terms do not say anything more than something invisible and mysterious exists that cannot be described with the known laws of physics. Really, it can't be disproved either, so therefore they really shouldn't be allowed. According to Newton's particle theory, light would consist of photons be trapped in a black hole and would be deflected in strong gravitational fields. We know light deflection is an optical phenomenon resulting from wave diffraction or refraction at phase boundaries between an optically thinner and an optically denser medium. This has nothing to do with gravity, but with the optical density of the medium in the vicinity of plasma balls. In terms of radiation, black is an absorption range of around 400 nanometers to 780 nanometers. Why should this area be preferred by gravity? Or should this phenomenon be extended to the entire electromagnetic spectrum? That would mean that in the vicinity of a black hole, not even thermal radiation should occur. In other words, since we can only learn something about the existence of cosmic objects through electromagnetic radiation, their existence would not be verifiable, because forces, if they can be measured, only reveal direction and strength, but not the nature of their origin. And I would think that electromagnetism is really the only thing they have to measure. What else is there? The decades-long dispute between Leonard Susskind and Stephen Hawking turned on the question of whether information can be retained in a black hole was also spectacular. This question is pretty academic and becomes easier to understand if you remember that light contains information about its light source in the form of a spectrum. If this information is not retained, it means that the light source is no longer lit, i.e., does not emit any electromagnetic radiation. But as long as charges cross a force field, they absorb or emit radiation and thus information. That would mean, however, that the entropy would decrease since the order would increase with the decrease in the movement of the atoms. This would contradict the second law of thermodynamics in a closed system. The dispute is recorded in the book The Black Hole War, My Battle with Stephen Hawking to Make the World Safe for Quantum Mechanics. This dispute continued for many years and ended in 2014 with Hawking's admission that there were no black holes. Notwithstanding this, the 2020 Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded for the discovery that the formation of black holes is a robust prediction of general relativity. You rub your eyes in amazement. Has the black hole war and its end eluded the Nobel Committee? Or was it celebrated astrophysics star Hawking posthumously disqualified as a dabbler? No, the general theory of relativity has become the foundation of the Catholic worldview. And what would happen if this foundation would crumble? How much research capacity would then be free for other tasks? The cosmos is an open system. Pope Francis himself undermined this very foundation when he wrote in paragraph 79 of his 2015 encyclical, "In this universe made up of open systems that communicate with one another, we can discover innumerable forms of relationship and participation." However, this statement would contradict physicists who understand the universe and black holes as closed systems, because the theory never spoke of an exit. According to Reverend Lemaitre, the universe expands. Now we know that information has something to do with entropy, and according to Ilja Prigogine, this applies to the change entropy in the overall open system.
ds system equals ds inp, ds out plus d sint equals ds plus d sint.
For a black hole, ds out equals 0 because by definition it does not release any entropy in the form of radiation. This means that the total entropy change of a black hole is
ds system greater than 0.
ds system greater than 0 would always be positive. The black hole could not cool down at all, since the total entropy would not decrease at any time. This would prevent the mass from being able to contract and would be the prerequisite for gravity to grow in a small area. Thermodynamics disturbs the beauty of the symmetry of the equations, which is why relativists and quantum mechanics want nothing to do with it. For the above equation, Prigogine was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1977. Now, chemistry, like physics, belongs to the natural sciences. It is assumed that the knowledge of this neighboring discipline should have been incorporated into physics over the past 4 decades. But what is, then, in the center of a galaxy if there is no black hole? Huge electrical currents flow in the center of a galaxy that, in turn, generate huge magnetic fields. These then cause charge separation. This is why we see plasma currents emerging from the center of certain galaxies, which is typical for a plasmoid. Unlike a black hole, a plasmoid is an open system. After the violation of Maxwell's equations by the symmetry fans among physicists who say there are no electrical currents in the cosmos, black spots are rather retouched in the images of galaxies at the points of highest luminance to mark a suspected black hole. Recently, a photo montage of recordings of large radio telescopes of galaxy nuclei has been in the press. If you know that gas molecules radiate in the radio range and have learned that molecules break down through ionization, it soon becomes clear that molecules are not preserved in the hot glowing center of a galaxy. So, the center in the radio range, which is glaring in visible light, comparatively has to emit less radiation. This is how this photo comes out, which depicts a situation that is interpreted completely differently from what it tells the expert. There are other examples in the recent history of physics where research results are supposed to support the untenable theories around the Big Bang model of cosmology. These include the alleged proof of gravitational waves from the collision of black holes or neutron stars, or the proof of the existence of the so rare God particle Higgs boson, that the mass should pass to the other particles. Obviously, such people have forgotten that mass is nothing more than an unaccountable amount of particles. The term mass, therefore, becomes superfluous in the area of individual elementary particles. It is worthwhile to take a closer look in science as well as in other areas where there is no control. You always have to expect to be cheated, especially since experiments are so expensive today that independent control is no longer possible in a timely manner. Unfortunately, general knowledge in the natural sciences, and especially in physics, has steadily declined over the past few decades, which is a fundamental disadvantage for a nation that, like ours, Germany, is dependent on education because it has no natural resources and which, under the influence of climate change, has to transform its economy towards clean energy generation. This requires an understanding of how the cosmos, and especially the sun, work as an open system. An understanding here means the construction of a fusion generator that delivers so much entropy from the fusion of atomic nuclei that a gas turbine can be operated with it. From thermodynamic point of view, the tokamak principle is obviously based on a wrong approach, namely that of a closed system in which high temperatures can be reached, but not a higher order as required by fusion. But that is a topic for another essay. And I believe this gentleman's name is
Matthias Huffner.
Matthias Huffner. I just don't understand how it is that we're ever going to expand or advance in science when they teach the wrong thing to the people at school. It just confounds me.
Notice the twin dots on the two sides of these crudely crafted stick figures. One instance alone is just a curiosity. But widespread patterns must have an explanation. And other details only accent the irrationality. Recently, an answer to these mysteries came from outside traditional archaeology, from plasma science and laboratory experiments with electric discharge. Plasma scientist Anthony Peratt of Los Alamos Laboratories has shown that these stick forms recorded electrical events in the sky. Something like the northern lights we see today, but 1,000 times more energetic. And he matches the rock art forms precisely to the configurations taken by electric discharge in the laboratory. The rock art images are explained as sheets of intense electric current in the evolution of a plasma discharge. The central column you see in this stylized representation is the axis of the discharge. Wrapped around the axis is a torus or donut-like tubular sheet of charged particles. The observer sees through the transparent formation, champagne glass above, squashed bell shape below, so the plasma density is greatest at the limbs. Drawn in 2 dimensions, the formation matches the stick man carved globally on stone by the thousands. The 2 dots under the stick man's arms are the exceedingly bright, high-energy radiation called synchrotron radiation, emitted from the center of the torus.
Physical snakes. This is political, or it is religious, theocratic, theological propaganda. He's saying, Christianity has arrived, I am in town, there's a new gig, there's a new game in town, and you can just forget about these serpents and the previous races that were here. Their time is over, and the new sun religion, the new solar paradigm has arrived. That is political, or it is religious, theocratic, theological propaganda. He's saying, Christianity has arrived, I am in town, there's a new gig, there's a new game in town, and you can just forget about these serpents and the previous races that were here. Their time is over, and the new sun religion, the new solar paradigm has arrived. That's what it represents. And it implies, of course, that the people of the prehistoric times, before Christianity, not only revered the symbol of the serpent, but were actually known as the serpents. And we'll come to more explanation of why that is a little bit later. Now, even though there's a great wealth coming out of the ancient mythologies of all countries, scientists disagree and speculate that there was no ancient civilizations of any merit in ancient times. But the ancient legends also speak about their own demise, just like the Tuatha Danann, saying that they came from islands that were destroyed in a great war of the gods and a great calamity of nature. So we have in many of the mythologies of the world this reference to destruction and cataclysm and upheaval. The most famous story, of course, is Noah, the famous patriarch, being literally told by God of a coming flood, and that the whole earth was going to be in tribulation, and that he should build a vessel so that the chosen ones could be saved. But that's not the only area in the scriptures where we read of cataclysm. Yes, there's the deluge, but then we also have the story of the 10 plagues of Egypt. We have the story of the destruction in Sodom and Gomorrah. And we have the story of the walls of Jericho being blasted to pieces. And many other areas through the whole book of Job, there's tumult and cataclysm and stories of great upheaval. In Genesis 6, God is saying, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. Now, from a scientific point of view, what are we told? We're told, yes, we have an ice age. This ice age happened in what we know as the Pleistocene epoch, and before the ice age, there was nothing. Men walked around in skins, and Neanderthal man, hunter-gatherers. No such concept as Atlantis or Lemuria or any other advanced civilization could possibly have existed. So what is the tenets of the official theory? Well, the high priests of geology were of Charles Lyell. He was the exponent of the theory of uniformity. That simply means that through the geological record, nature, evolution, all of these things are incrementally slow, very, very slow movements of development over vast expanses of time. Louis Agassiz, he was the exponent of the glacial theory, exponent of the ice ages, and particularly Professor James Geekie, geology professor at Edinburgh University, a major champion of the ice age theory. And believe me, that's all it is, a theory, as we're about to see. Now, the ice ages are meant to have taken place, geologically speaking, in what is known as the Pleistocene epoch. This is the epoch lasting 2 million years that is housing what we know as the ice age. But Professor James Geekie says, if there is anything more fantastic than Geekie's extravagant theory, it is that it has been lapped up by his successors and by intelligent men who, by logic alone, should be able to denounce it. Yet it is today a dogma. This is Commons Beaumont, one of the most suppressed scholars of all time, talking about Geekie's findings. He says it's unsustainable, simply a dogma. Communist Beaumont goes on to say, the flood, to the world generally a vague and nebulous tradition, really conceals the most appalling visitation, and its ravages in the British Isles and Scandinavian lands may be retraced to more considerable extent by the effects of what geologists term the drift age. It was no mere ice drift, it was a sudden and terribly swift and violent. So Beaumont was one of the great catastrophists. Along with Immanuel Velikovsky, he was a person who decried and did not believe in or subscribe to the uniformitarian philosophy. He understood that we had been visited by tremendously swift cataclysms of the past. And he spent his life trying to refute what Geekie and the uniformitarianists were advancing. And in the fine book, When the Earth Nearly Died, by Allen and Dallaire, they say, it is an astonishing that such an unscientific explanation ever came to be formulated, yet in a short time both it and the concept of immense, thick ice sheets descending from a hypothetical northern mountain system was enthusiastically embraced as virtually established fact. They go on to write, the evidence is perfectly unambiguous, along with the removal of an ice age like that which is hitherto commonly envisaged. The evidence suggests that there is something seriously amiss with the last phases of standard geological chronology. Now, these unsustainable theories of ice ages and drift ages has been refuted in the 90s by several authors, not only Allen and Dallaire, but by Michael Cremo in his monumental work Forbidden Archaeology, and more specifically by the Observer magazine scientific writer Robert Milton, who wrote a fine book called Shattering the Myths of Darwin. Now, Clifford Wilson, in his book, The Chariots Still Crash, he says, some dates obtained by other radiometric methods are seriously astray, such as the age of millions of years being attributed to volcanic rocks in Hawaii, which are known to be less than 200 years old. This is reported in the Journal of Geophysical Research. It is known that these lava rocks were actually formed in 1800 and 1801 in Hualai in Hawaii. The potassium-argon dating methods was utilized, and a formation age of 160 million to 3 billion years were given for this rock formation, which was known to be just over 170 years old. This is not an isolated report. Rock samples from 12 volcanoes in Russia and 10 samples from other places around the world, all known to be of recent age, that is, formed within the last 200 years, when dated by the uranium, thorium, lead method, gave ages varying from millions to billions of years. So here's your science for you. But luckily, a lot of these scientific findings are now being seriously refuted, and we need to know about this. Clifford Wilson goes on to say, there is increasing evidence to suggest that those figures of millions of years, which we were given in our childhood, must be put to one side. And indeed they must. But what would happen if they are? What happens if we suddenly start to question these Royal Academy and Royal Society dates and figures and scholarship? Well, then the truth of what might be behind that Pleistocene epoch, I mean, if you concertine the whole 2 million year Pleistocene epoch out of existence, suddenly you have no ice ages, no substantial ice ages, and therefore no great wall between our time and the past. Evidence thus converges from numerous directions to support the conclusion that on the testimony of radiocarbon and other dating techniques, immense physical and climatic changes occurred on Earth some 11,000 years or so ago, when an ice age that probably never existed came to an end, and the apparently uniformitarian regime was abruptly terminated. There you are. That's Allen and Dallaire saying that something happened so much more recently, and it had very little to do with an ice age. Thus, if many of today's highest mountains were much lower when the alleged ice age was reputedly at its zenith, then how did so much ice, if it actually existed, manage to accumulate? Indeed, we can take a step further and ask whether the ice sheets, so beloved of the glacialists, ever existed at all. Now, these two geologists have discovered that the mountains that are quite high today all over the world were not as high 11,000 years ago. Well, of course, that goes to the heart of the glacialists' theory. You have to have very high peaks in order to have the cold for the ice sheets to be created. But if they actually were being told, then there goes your ice theory, right out the window. They go on to say, the time allegedly occupied by the glacial and interglacial episodes of conventional Pleistocene chronology was actually non-existent. Now, how come we have not heard worldwide debate about this book or of Robert Milton's Shattering Myths of Darwinism?